the first point of which is rolling GRATs. And this is essentially what Peter and I were talking about with respect to 2-year GRATs. A rolling GRAT, it's related to the short term. It's not exactly the same thing. So we talked about why it makes sense to do short-term GRATs. If you're going to do short-term GRATs, you're still likely going to want to have a long-term GRAT strategy, because the longer you're doing GRATs, even if each one is short, the more you're going to pass to your beneficiaries tax-free, right? It's better to do GRATs over the course of 20 years and see a lot of growth than to do just 1-2-year GRAT and be done. And the way that's typically done, the state of the art, and the way Valur does it, is to use what are called rolling GRATs. What this means essentially is the trust is going to pay you that annuity amount at the end of every year. If you're doing a 2-year GRAT, you're going to get about half your money back. And at the end of every year, in a rolling GRAT, you would roll that money into a new GRAT. And so in the first year, you'd have one GRAT with, let's say, $1 million in it. In year 2, you'd get 500,000 plus interest back at the end of year 1. You'd now roll that 500 into a new GRAT. And now you'd have 2 $500,000 GRATs. And at the end of year 2, you would take the 500,000 distribution from the first one, plus potentially a distribution from the second one, and you'd roll it into 2 more trusts going forward. The point is, it's not really about how many trusts you have or exactly what the size is, but rather the idea is that you can roll your annuity into a new trust, and with Valur, you can do so automatically with one click, and you can extend this GRAT strategy cheaply, efficiently for potentially many years and gain those benefits. Peter, anything more on the rolling strategy before I move on?
No, we can move on.
Backloading. This is a good. The next 3 are all actually kind of clever but well-established. 2 of them are clever and well-established moves. The last one is a clever and less well-established, but I think really sound move. Backloading is the idea that you'd rather have more money in your GRAT growing and being invested for longer. And so whereas the standard GRAT would pay you half of your money back at the end of the first year plus interest, and then half of your money plus interest the second year, you can backload those payments by the kind of approved approach here is to have them increase 20% each year. So you're getting back more like 45% of your money or 40% of your money in the first year, and 55 or 60% of your money plus interest in the second year. And that way, the amount that is remaining invested is higher for longer, and you can get more growth and pass more to your beneficiaries. Peter, I guess, again.
The only thing I would add is that 20% increase is in the regulations. So specifically set forth in regulations that you could increase by 20% a year.
Yeah. And that's also just for everybody's kind of peace of mind. And I think this goes to how well established GRATs are. That's in the regulations. It got there kind of, Peter, right, as the result of some litigation. This was a conversation between taxpayers and the IRS where this was kind of hashed out, and Congress and the IRS settled on 20%. And so that's now something that's written down and you can follow without any real fear of things like audit risk. Peter, you want to talk about asset swaps?
Yeah, the idea of asset swaps. So GRATs are granted for income tax purposes, which means you can enter into transactions with your GRAT without any income or capital gains tax consequences. What Valur helps people do is swap assets out of GRATs at certain times. Why might that make sense? Let's say you have an asset like a stock that's gone up 50% in the first year. You could either leave that asset in the GRAT and take the risk that it might drop before the end of year 2, which would cause the GRAT to potentially fail. Or you could swap the asset out now, essentially guarantee that the GRAT is going to succeed to some extent, and then regift those swapped assets into a new GRAT. So that way you're protecting against the possibility of that stock dropping, and you're still capturing any future appreciation by setting up a new GRAT. So
that's right. In some ways, Valur is just replacing traditional service providers on this stuff, right? You would have traditionally hired a lawyer to set up your GRAT and then a trust company or an accountant to run it. Valur does all of that, and that's really valuable stuff, and we do so very quickly and efficiently, right? We'll set you up a GRAT in 24 hours, and we'll do so for free. But where I think in some ways, where we really shine is in these optimizations. Asset swaps are a well-established strategy, but one that many, many users of GRATs leave on the table and don't pursue, either because they don't know about them or because the administration is mildly complicated, right? They've got to decide to do the swap. They've got to facilitate the transfer and the replacement of the assets with something else. Valur has built processes to do that, again, with the click of a button. You have an account with Valur, you set up your GRAT. When it comes time, and Valur actually will trigger a notification for you and say, hey, your assets have grown substantially. Given our back testing, it may be worth looking at an asset swap. If you'd like to do that, click here. You do so, and we'll facilitate that swap for you, do it automatically, and do the paperwork for you. And that's just a broader point about what Valur's doing here. We're aiming to make all of this just really, really simple and even on the more complex strategies, which brings us to the last point here, indexed GRATs. Peter, this is your baby, so you want to talk about it?
Yeah, so the basic idea here is, rather than putting a bunch of stocks or a bunch of different assets into a single GRAT, you can break up those GRATs into, you basically put a single asset into each of a bunch of GRATs. So if you had 10 stocks, rather than putting them all into a single GRAT, you could put each of them into 10 different GRATs. And the idea is that those stocks aren't going to be perfectly correlated. And so there's always a risk that one of them will do really well and another one will do really poorly and kind of cancel each other out. If you break up GRATs into separate GRATs for each separate stock or separate asset, you're able to really capitalize on the assets that appreciate a lot without having to worry about the drag from the assets that underperform.
That's right. And that's, I think, in principle or in logic, really related to the idea of rolling GRATs. The idea with both of these strategies, with the short-term GRATs and with what we call indexed GRATs, the idea in both cases is to be taking advantage of inherent volatility. The shorter your term of investment, the higher the volatility. Assets go up and down. And if you're doing it for the course of 2 years, they're likely to have a wider swing up or down than they would if you did a 20-year GRAT. Similarly, with index GRATs, having 1/10 of your money in one stock and 1/10 in a second stock and so on, or even at the extreme end, 1/500th of your money in every stock in the S. You're going to find that some of those GRATs and some of those short-term GRATs and some of those GRATs with one stock in them will end up outperforming. And what we've shown in our modeling, I'd suggest that you schedule a call and we'll share this with you in some detail. What we've shown is that you're better off having even just a few huge winners over the course of your GRATs, both short-term and indexed, even if it means lots of losers, rather than having just kind of a muddled middle, okay run with all of your GRATs. And so again, this is something that we make easy. If you want to do 10 GRATs, it's really the same from our perspective and for you as setting up one GRAT. We do that all automatically and make it easy. So don't be kind of afraid of these strategies. They're all kind of made simple by what we've done and worth pursuing.